Chapter 7. So we just wrapped up the experience with school and with Maureen Quilling and the real world. And I think Bod has learned that it's important that he stay connected to that living world, but that there are still some risks out there that he needs to be careful of. Chapter 7. Every Man Jack. Silas had been preoccupied for the previous several months. See if that's better. Silas had been preoccupied for the previous several months. He had begun to leave the graveyard for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Over Christmas, Miss Lupescu had come out for 3 weeks in his place, and Bod had shared her meals in her little flat in the old town. She had even taken him to a football match, as Silas had promised that she would, but she had gone back to the place she called the old country, after squeezing Bod's cheeks and calling him Nimini, which had become her pet name for him. Now Silas was gone, and Miss Lupescu also. Mr. and Mrs. Owens were sitting in Josiah Worthington's tomb, talking to Josiah Worthington. None of them was happy. Josiah Worthington said, "You mean to say that he did not tell either of you where he was going or how the child was to be cared for?" When the Owenses shook their heads, Josiah Worthington said, "Well, where is he?" The Owenses with Josiah Worthington cleaning out his tomb. One of those drawings that kind of overlaps into the next page. Neither Owens was able to answer. Master Owens said, "He's never been gone for so long before, and he promised when the child came to us, promised he would be here or someone else would be here to help us care for him. He promised." Mrs. Owens said, "I worry that something must have happened to him." She seemed close to tears, and then her tears turned to anger, and she said, "This is too bad of him. There is no way to find him, to call him back." "None that I know," said Josiah Worthington, "but I believe that he's left money in the crypt for food for the boy." "Money," said Mrs. Owens. "What good is money?" "Bod will be needing money if he's to go out there to buy food," said Mr. Owens, but Mrs. Owens turned on him. "You're all as bad as each other," she said. She left the Worthington tomb then, and she went looking for her son, whom she found as she expected to on the top of the hill, staring out over the town. "Penny for your thoughts," said Mrs. Owens. "You don't have a penny," said Bod. He was 14 now, and taller than his mother. "I've got 2 in the coffin," said Mrs. Owens. "Probably a bit green by now, but I've still got them right enough." "I was thinking about the world," said Bod. "How do we even know that the person who killed my family is still out there, still alive?" "Silas says he is," said Mrs. Owens. "But Silas doesn't tell us anything else." Mrs. Owens said, "He means only the best for you. You know that." "Thanks," said Bod, unimpressed. "So where is he?" Mrs. Owens made no reply. Bod said, "You saw the man who killed my family, didn't you? On the day that you adopted me?" Mrs. Owens nodded. "What was he like?" "Mostly I had eyes for you. Let me see, he had dark hair, very dark, and I was frightened of him. He had a sharp face, hungry and angry all at once. He was hungry and angry all at once he was. Silas saw him off." "Why didn't Silas just kill him?" said Bod fiercely. "He should have just killed him then." Mrs. Owens touched the back of Bod's hand with her cold fingers. She said, "He's not a monster, Bod. If Silas had killed him back then, I would be safe now. I could go anywhere." "Silas knows more than you do about all this, more than any of us do. And Silas knows about life and death," said Mrs. Owens. "It's not that easy." Bod said, "What was his name?" "The man who killed them." "He didn't say it, not then." Bod put his head on one side and stared at her with eyes as gray as thunderclouds. "But you know it, don't you?" Mrs. Owens said, "There's nothing you can do, Bod." "There is. I can learn everything I need to know, all I can. I learned about ghoul gates. I learned to dream walk. Miss Lupescu taught me how to watch the stars. Silas taught me silence. I can haunt. I can fade. I know every inch of this graveyard." Mrs. Owens reached out a hand, and touched her son's shoulder. "One day," she said, and then she hesitated. One day she would not be able to touch him. One day he would leave them. One day. And then she said, "Silas told me the man who killed your family was called Jack." Bod said nothing. Then he nodded. "Mother, what is it, son? When will Silas come back?" The midnight wind was cold and it came from the north. Mrs. Owens was no longer angry. She feared for her son. She said only, "I wish I knew, my darling boy. I wish I knew." It's interesting. It seems like, again, this is this thing that Silas has to do, where he has to disappear to get information or to deal with things. And it seems like it's got to be connected to what this whole thing is all about. And I'm just trying to pick up on any clues I can about what Silas knows and what he doesn't know, and what he's doing about it. The honor guard, that comes to mind. Scarlett Amber Perkins was 15, and at that moment, sitting on the upper deck of the elderly bus, she was a mass of angry hate. She hated her parents for splitting up. She hated her mother for moving away from Scotland, hated her father because he didn't seem to care that she had gone. He hated this town for being so different, nothing like Glasgow, where she had grown up, and she hated it because every now and again she would turn a corner and see something, and the world would all become achingly, horribly familiar. Scarlett Amber Perkins. That name's familiar. I think that's Bod's friend from when he was 4 or 5. She had lost it with her mother that evening. "At least in Glasgow I had friends," Scarlett had said, and she wasn't quite shouting and she wasn't quite sobbing. "I'll never see them again." All her mother had said in reply was, "At least you're somewhere you've been before. I mean, we lived here when you were little." "I don't remember," said Scarlett, "and it's not like I still know anyone. Do you want me to find my old friends from when I was 5? Is that what you want?" And her mother had said, "Well, I'm not stopping you." Scarlett had gone through the whole of the school day angry, and she was angry now. She hated her school, she hated the world, and right now she was particularly hated the town bus service. Every day when school was over, the 97 bus to the city center would take her from her school gates all the way to the end of the street where her mother had rented a small flat. She had waited at the bus stop on that gusty April day for almost half an hour, and no 97 buses had appeared. So when she saw a 121 bus with city center as its destination, she had climbed aboard. But where her bus always turned right, this one turned left, into the old town, past the municipal gardens in the old town square, past the statue of Josiah Worthington Bartholomew, and then crept up a winding hill lined with high houses, as Scarlett's heart sank and her anger was replaced with misery. She walked downstairs, edged forward, eyed the sign telling her not to speak to the driver when the vehicle was in motion, and said, "Excuse me, I wanted to go to Acacia Avenue." The driver, a large woman, her skin even darker than Scarlett's, said, "You should have gotten the 97 then." "But this goes to the city center." "Eventually, but even when you get there, you'll still need to get back," the woman sighed. "Best thing you can do, get off here, walk back down the hill. There's a bus stop in front of the town hall. From there, you can catch the number 4 or the 58. Both of them will take you most of the way to Acacia Avenue. You could get off by the sports center and walk up from there. You got all that?" The 4 or the 58. "I'll let you off here." It was a request stop on the side of the hill, just past a large pair of open iron gates, and it looked uninviting and dismal. Scarlett stood in the open doorway of the bus until the bus driver said, "Go on, hop it." She stepped down onto the pavement, and the bus belched black smoke and roared away. The wind rattled the trees on the other side of the wall as Scarlett began to walk back down the hill. This was why she needed a mobile phone, she thought. If she was so much as 5 minutes late, her mother would freak, but she still wouldn't buy Scarlett a phone of her own. Oh well, she would have to endure another shouting match. It wouldn't be the first, and it wouldn't be the last. By now, she was level with the open gates. She glanced inside and, "That's odd," she said aloud. There's an expression, Deja vu, that means you feel like you've been somewhere before and you've somehow already dreamed it or experienced it in your mind. Scarlett had experienced it, the knowledge that a teacher was about to tell them that she'd been to Inverness on holiday, or that someone had dropped a spoon in just that way before. This was different. This wasn't a feeling that she had been here before. This was the real thing. Scarlett walked through the open gates into the graveyard. A magpie flew up as she walked in, a flash of black and white and iridescent green, and settled in the branches of a yew tree, watching her. Around that corner, she thought, is a church with a bench in front of it, and she turned a corner to see a church, much smaller than the one in her head, a sinister, blocky little Gothic building of gray stone with a jutting spire. In front of it was a weathered wooden bench. She walked over, sat down on the bench, and swung her legs as if she were still a little girl. "Hello? Hello?" said a voice from behind her. "Awful cheek of me, I know, but would you help me hold down this, just really need another pair of hands, if it's not too much trouble?" Scarlett looked around and saw a man in a fawn-colored raincoat squatting in front of a gravestone. He was holding a large sheet of paper, which was blowing about in the wind. She hurried over to him. "You hold on to it there," said the man. "One hand here, one hand there. That's right. Frightful imposition, I know. Ridiculously grateful." He had a biscuit tin next to him, and from the tin he pulled what looked like a crayon the size of a small candle. He began rubbing it back and forth across the stone with easy, practiced movements. "There we go," he said cheerfully, "and here she comes. Oops, wiggly bit down at the bottom here. I think it's meant to be ivy. The Victorians loved putting ivy on things, deeply symbolic, you know, and there we are. You can let go now." He stood up, ran one hand through his gray hair. "Ooh, needed to stand. Legs got a bit pins and needlesy," he said. "So, what do you reckon to that?" The actual headstone was covered in green and yellow lichen, and so worn and faded as to almost be undecipherable, but the rubbing was clear. "Majella Godspeed, spinster of this parish, 1791 to 1870, lost to all but memory." Oops, Scarlett read aloud. "Majella Godspeed, spinster of this parish, 1791 to 1870, lost to all but memory," Scarlett read aloud. "And probably now lost even to that," said the man. His hair was thinning, and he smiled hesitantly and blinked at her through small round glasses, which made him look like a friendly owl. A large raindrop splashed down on the paper, and the man hurriedly rolled it up and grabbed his tin box of crayons. Another handful of raindrops, and Scarlett picked up the portfolio the man pointed to, propped up beside a nearby gravestone, and followed him into the tiny porch of the church where the rain could not touch them. "Thank you so much," said the man. "I don't think it's really going to rain much. Weather forecast for this afternoon says mostly sunny." As if in reply, the wind gusted coldly and the raindrops began to beat down in earnest. "I know what you're thinking," the gravestone rubbing man said to Scarlett. "You do?" she said. She had been thinking, "My mum will kill me." "You're thinking, is this a church or a funeral chapel? And the answer is, as far as I can ascertain, that on this site there was indeed a small church, and the original graveyard would have been its churchyard. That's as long ago as 8, perhaps 900 A.D., rebuilt and extended several times in there, but there was a fire here in the 1820s, and by that time it was already much too small for the area. People around here were using St. Dunstan's in the village square as their parish church, so when they came to rebuild here, they made it a funeral chapel, keeping many of the original features. The stained glass windows and the far wall are said to be original. Actually, said Scarlett, I was thinking that my mum was going to kill me. I got the wrong bus and I'm already so late home. Good Lord, you poor